financial crisis, but the unique proposed solutions to solve it. Is this the thing?
Yep, the down arrow.
So I press the down arrow. So is the down arrow when you, depends which way you face? Okay, this is what we're going to learn today. What's going on in the economy? What are derivatives? What is bail-in? What is Glass-Steagall? What is a national bank? And what you should do. I don't mean to scare anyone, because this is why it's so much fun representing the Citizens Electoral Council. Because once you have knowledge, you have power, and it's up to us to make our lives worthy so that we leave something behind to future generations. Last week marked the 10th anniversary of the global financial crash with the collapse of Lehman Brothers financial services firm, the largest bankruptcy filing in US history, which held over $600 billion in assets or subprime debt. Subprime meaning we wouldn't want to buy subprime steak, you like prime steak. So they've been selling this debt, subprime, for a long time. Markets crashed after Lehman went bankrupt, which created the term too big to fail, and the decision was made to save the banking system using taxpayer-funded bailouts rather than reorganise the global debt. Did we learn anything? The global banking system, headquartered in the City of London and Wall Street in New York, is today much worse, riddled with 1.2 quadrillion, that's 1,200 trillion in derivatives debt, which almost nobody talks about. These financial clearing houses are a house of cards, not backed up by anything real in the physical world. In 2008, when the GFC hit, they received a taxpayer-funded bailout of tens of trillions of dollars. And since then, they have printed money out of thin air. They call it quantitative easing. So you've had quantitative easing 1, QE2, QE3, QE4. Now, at the anniversary of the GFC, they're contemplating QE5, which is just printing money. And all this has, and credit policy of bail-in, all overseen internationally by our bank regulators in Australia, such as APRA, Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, ASIC, Australian Security Investment Corp. I think I'm just not sure what ASIC stands for, I've just lost it for a sec. The Australian Treasury and the Reserve Bank of Australia. The Royal Commission into Banking is investigating these bank regulators. So they're revealing a lot that's in our favour, in the people's favour. Finally, the corruption's being aired. This financial empire thinks it's all powerful, but history proves that all empires collapse, just as all bubbles burst, and they will do desperate things to save their dying system. We're living through that collapse, which ironically presents us with great opportunity right now. The CEC began organising to change the banking system for Australia since the 1980s, when Prime Ministers Hawke and Keating deregulated the banks. The CEC set out to educate, organise and activate ordinary Australians, and also worked with politically like-minded associates in other countries for a new Bretton Woods conference for a just, orderly bankruptcy reorganisation, which Glass-Steagall bank separation would only be the first step. For without taking charge of the banking system itself, the Australian government is not in charge and cannot govern but to a secondary degree. And that's to quote John Curtin, old Labor, not the current Labor, because they did have a Royal Commission into the banks in 1937-38, and it was revealed then that the government should be in charge of banking. So let's begin defining the problem in the banks, and then the banker's non-solution and how we solve it. Okay, now, Lyndon LaRouche is a physical economist and a statesman of America. He's way into his 90s now, so not, with it these days, but the CEC has roots in his philosophical understanding of the American system of physical economy. So I'm sorry if I'm introducing to you a lot of new ideas, new concepts, but that's why you're here, isn't it? So this graph, say the beginning of it there, because time goes to the right. The beginning of it is when post-war, right, at the end of the World War II, towards the end of World War II, there was set up a conference in a town called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire in America, where leaders of the world, 44 nations, got together and they agreed to set the standard for a global recovery. And that included fixed exchange rates, so there was no gambling on other people's currencies. There was currency control so that governments could limit or put regulations on what was leaving their country in terms of currencies. It was putting the control back into governments. And national banking was key, right? A national bank like the old Commonwealth Bank, that was the standard of the American system of banking. They created it. And it's just that most presidents who represent national banking don't live very long, so those were the key foundations of the post-war recovery. Where the lines dissipate and you've got the physical economic output, where that starts to leave from the financial aggregates and monetary aggregates, that's 1971, when President Nixon floated the American dollar and world trade. Most of world trade is in American currencies. So the physical economy is what we're all familiar with, what keeps human beings alive and flourishing, right? We could live in the caves, but you don't live very well or for very long. So there's been discoveries made throughout human history that's got us to this high standard of living. And those things would include farming, manufacturing, healthcare, education, water projects, power stations, nation building, making internal improvements. We take it for granted. But for the last 30 years or more, since 71, there's been a deliberate, what they called, under Jimmy Carter, you had this guy, Brzezinski, who really ran the administration. It was called controlled disintegration of the physical economy. Right? You don't boil the frog too quickly, people might revolt. So it's been happening gradually over decades. Those things that built this nation are being undermined gradually. The other two, monetary aggregates, think of money, okay? Paper, folding stuff, coins, and credit card, right? The stuff we use every day. Financial aggregates is speculation on the stock market, especially derivatives. It's purely gambling, and nothing is produced. You can collapse the physics. You can keep printing money till the cows come home. You can keep speculating. It doesn't produce anything. You're just moving money around. The physical economy, if you collapse it 100%, you've got a dark age. And we've had dark ages. I mean, because all this is a financial empire. City of London, Wall Street. Now, so this graph was put together in 1994. So, it's predicting things are going wrong, but like I said, there's solutions to come. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, that blue line there, the financial agri, the speculation system, you know, needed way up. It's kind of making its way up again because what happened? Well, they kept on gambling, didn't they? Nobody went to jail. So, just so you know a little bit about us, we produced this book, the Citizens Electoral Council produced this book, What Australians Do to Survive the Depression, in 2001. It's not about growing vegetables in your backyard. There's economic policies the government needs to adopt that we need to restore. Okay. So this is Australian Financial Review in 1994. It was on the LaRouche, and they put this statement out in January, published in the AFR. We are, according to American polemicist Lyndon H. LaRouche Jr., facing a derivatives bubble, a threat of enormous magnitude. The bubble grows like a cancer at the expense of its host and shrinks its host at the same time as its appetite is growing, while the means of satisfying that appetite are collapsing. That host would be the physical economy. So in some of you, you've got here early enough, would have received one of these on your chair. This is where this graph comes from. Total derivatives in the Australian banks. So it takes you from, we deregulated the banks in the 80s, isn't it? With the Hawke and Keating sell-off of the Commonwealth Bank. And the GFC hit in 2008, and you see a little dip there, but really, nobody went to jail, they continued gambling, and we're paying the price of it today. Australia's banks have become addicted to derivatives, the fraudulent and toxic financial betting instruments that caused the GFC, while derivatives betting globally levelled off for a few years, until recently in Australia it exploded. The combined derivatives exposure of Australia's banks has risen 163% in 8 years. And where it says off balance sheet, that means it doesn't go through the exchange, it's just one bank trading with another bank. There's still nothing produced. The big four, assets, deposits, and derivatives. The red represents the derivatives, and you see the far left side, you've got National Australia Bank, and the Commonwealth, ANZ, and Westpac. So it dwarfs anything they could use to bail out. If there's a banking crisis tomorrow, nothing you could do could bail out the derivatives debt. And it used to be, they used to have these, put in reports every year of how much derivatives trading they do. Now the Commonwealth and NAB don't declare their derivatives. I'm not going to play that here. Another thing you should have on your desk is this newspaper here. Now, the centre of global trading in these derivatives, remember, there's just gamblers' side bets. So we took a raffle today, but if I was going to do a gambling bet, I might say, I bet your Dot doesn't win, or I bet your Dot wins, or whatever, and someone might have a bet with me, and then someone else might bet on what I'm betting with somebody else. Goes on and on. So Deutsche Bank is one of these big international banks, German-British bank. It's the centre of the trade in derivatives. Over 100 trillion per year gambled in derivatives. And down the bottom, the purple along the bottom is the European banks, the biggest derivatives traders. The purple up on the right-hand side are the American banks, and the green represents the Asian banks. Up the top it says here, globally, systemically important financial institutions. Since Lehman Brothers collapsed 10 years ago, they created the term too big to fail, and also these globally, systemically important, because if one goes down, they all go down. And you can see each of those bubbles represent the trade, the amount of trade going between them. Okay. they're non-solution in case the banks fail, since taxpayer-funded bailouts are not popular anymore. They said, let's try bail-in, meaning steal the customer's deposits to prop up a failed bank. All of the EU countries, US, Canada, UK, New Zealand have passed bail-in law. Bail-in has been applied in Cyprus in 2013, where they called it a template to enact when a bank collapses. And since this has been applied to since 2013, apart from Cyprus, it's been applied in Spain, Greece, Portugal. But the CEC has mobilised against it. Okay. Have a copy of this ad. So this is an ad we put in the Australian on December the 3rd, 2013. Don't seize our bank accounts past Steagall. Because in 2013 we found evidence, which I'll show you in a minute. Just briefly, I'll touch on the evidence, but and we had to call everybody that we could, and we got our supporters from around the country, flew them into Melbourne. I was one of them, and we made thousands of phone calls to industry leaders, farmers, politicians, candidates who wanted to become politicians, media, military, and community leaders. And from that, making about 4,000 calls, we got about 450 people who were prepared not just to agree. It's easy to agree, yeah, they mustn't steal our bank accounts to prop up the banks. But it's very difficult to put their name to an ad that's going publicly, and we had to have their signature on a bit of paper, which it all takes time and energy. So there was local government officials, former elected officials, academics, educators, unions, like I said, candidates and so forth. So if anyone wants to see if their name's on here, if they've ever been run by the CEC, you know we never give up. So here's the evidence of bail-in. Our researchers searched the Financial Stability Board, which in this paper here, on page 3, you have a flow chart of power from the City of London down to the Australian bank regulators, and it goes through the Bank of England, Bank for International Settlements, and the Financial Stability Board, the IMF, how they're targeting Australia for bail-in. My presentation would go on too long if I read the small print, but you have it there. Okay, Treasury calls for bail-in power. So the first one was 2011. Here's 2012. IMF and in Treasury papers, even going to the footnotes. See this little there, footnote 41. We read the footnotes. It's no use. You won't find anything about it in the mainstream media. Private bankers welcome bail-in. So if you think your bank's not one of those majors or you're in a credit union, this group here, Australian Financial Markets Association members, all financial institutions in Australia, have combined annual financial derivatives turnover of 125 trillion. And just to put it in perspective, Australia's GDP, like everything that we produce every year, it's only 1.5 trillion. It's not much compared with, we do produce a lot, like we feed a lot of people around the world, but the amount of derivatives in the system far outweighs anything that we could bail them out with. Okay, and then the Financial Stability Board, reveals Australian legislation in training. It says here, completing the resolution for banks. So you can't just go to Google and put bail-in, you won't find it. But, if you know the scent of this beast, you can read and understand the other language they use. It is critical that authorities have a broad range of powers at their disposal when faced with a crisis, because the banks are preparing for a crisis. This is not the case in all financial stability jurisdictions. In many jurisdictions, resolution authorities still lack the powers set out in the key attributes to
to achieve rapid transfer of assets and liabilities and to write down debt of a failing institution. This is the yellow bit now, or convert it into equity, bail-in, although legislation is in train in some jurisdictions, including Australia, Brazil, EU, France, blah, blah. So that was the big one that we found. So we go organising on the street, armed with material like we've got up the back there. At the G20, bail-in was on the agenda, and the G20 in 2014 was in Brisbane. This is when we knew it was, we had to mobilise all of our forces to get out there on the streets, and we produced hundreds of thousands of newspapers like the one you have on your table, and hundreds of thousands of press releases going out weekly. And because of our mobilisation, it didn't pass. It was passed the following year when the G20 met in Turkey. In 2014, the Financial System Inquiry, which was run, the recommendations headed up by David Murray, who's a former CEO of the Commonwealth Bank from 1992 to 2005, who oversaw full privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank. So they've got this box in charge of the henhouse. So the Financial Systems Inquiry is headed up by a banker that saw the privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank. He would not investigate the structure of banks, and instead his final recommendations was crisis management, not crisis prevention. And this is not just us saying this is according to Dr. Wilson Sy, who's a former APRA, one of the bank regulators. He was employed by APRA as a principal researcher, during the GFC, and his reports about the coming crisis also were buried, and still today haven't seen the light of day because he's sworn to secrecy, otherwise jail terms. And now he's working with us, so his voice is being heard, but he's still very careful about what he says. This is the Financial Sector Legislation Amendment, Crisis Resolution, Powers and Other Measures Bill. In other words, the bail-in bill for Australia. It was 411 pages long. Most politicians didn't even know it was coming up for a vote, let alone read it. We organised people, our supporters, to go to their MP and get them to download it, and many of them did. Printer was working for ages, downloading. They were just ignorant of it. But then when it finally came up for the vote, there wasn't even a quorum because no bells were rung. They didn't warn the politicians that this was going to come up for a vote. There was a handful of politicians in the Senate and a handful in the House of Reps, and it passed on February the 12th and the 14th through both houses. Really quick. They can do things really quick when they need to, but because of our mobilisation, that's the only way they could sneak it through. Yeah, normally a bill like this would get like a dozen or so interested parties, bankers, office boys putting in reports. We generated 2,000 submissions against this bill from the general public, including from Malcolm Fraser, who wrote a submission recommending to break up the structure of banks with the Steagall principle, which I'll get to. Alas, it passed. That was a 5-year mobilisation to stop this bill. We didn't stop it, but in the process, because people love to have a fight over something really meaningful. So now we do have hundreds more people, more potent, at more higher levels of government and institutional levels, like Dr. Wilson Sy, like Denise Brayley of the Bankers Committee in Western Australia that represents bank victims. And there's many more institutional people coming out promoting that we should be breaking up the banks. So it's one thing to be against bail-in, but it's more important, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to stand for? Just so you know what the meaning of Glass-Steagall and breaking up the banks is, In 1929, when the Great Depression hit, right, because of the 29 collapse of 9,000 American banks collapsed and world trades in American dollars. This is huge, and people just couldn't live in their cars. They were on the streets. The president, who wasn't, this wasn't the president, it was Herbert Hoover, and he created shanty towns because he was forever bailing out the banks. So when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was elected in 1932-33, inaugurated in 33, one of the first things he did in the first 100 days, this is what's crucial about this, when a prime minister or president gets elected, what are they going to do? Well, he put bankers on trial, and he played that over radio, the internet of the day, and he bought, these, what do you call them, use some biblical term or something, get the money changers out of the temple or something, and they were brought down to size, and Senator Carter Glass and Congressman Henry Steagall, they wrote the legislation under Roosevelt's leadership, right? It's very crucial to have a leader who's prepared to put his life on the line. If you don't have a statesman, right, like a soldier going into battle, they don't go to get killed, but they go to do something better for the lives of people. So, they got it passed. No one was game to give the banks anything more. But soon after, Glass and Steagall tried to repeal it, because they were really like bankers' office boys. They weren't statesmen themselves. So the Citizens Electoral Council has written Glass-Steagall Banking System Reform for Australia. It's called Banking System Reform Separation of Banks Bill, and ours is the coloured one. This is the draft copy. You can get copies up there if you want to take to your federal member of parliament. It's modelled on the original Glass-Steagall bill, and it separates commercial banking, where's the factory there, right? You protect farms, you protect factories, you protect pensioners, you protect people's savings. That physical economy, remember that graphic right at the start, that physical economy, you protect everything human. The investment side is the gambling side, the casino economy. You let that fall. It's only money. That can be hard for people to give up, but when you understand we're heading for a crash worse than the Great Depression, can't be bailed out. We've got to get this Glass-Steagall bank separation in, that bill in, and before the next crash. Otherwise, what's already in place is the bail-in, where they already have your money, and it's law in Australia. Again, just another way helping you to explain. On the left, it's protected, you have a firewall, so you have a different board in a different building, two completely separate entities. So the big four banks will be broken into 8. At the original, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, faced with that crash, immediate chaos, he gave them 1 to 2 years to divest themselves of all this funny gambling money. And meanwhile, as what's written in our bill as well, over that time, you protect people's deposits, you protect the savings, you protect their pensions, you protect their super. That's what happens. There's a precedent that it worked, because they did get out of the Depression. Right? Australia suffered it for 10 years longer, unnecessarily, but I won't get into that. But it wasn't because we didn't have a Commonwealth Bank, it was because we didn't use it. The current government at the time didn't build the infrastructure to get the country going. It wasn't until 1939 when the war started, then Australia moved using the Commonwealth Bank. But you don't protect all this gambling. Let them gamble, but with their own money at their own peril. Now, I'll just put that, I'm not going to explain it. It's the same thing what I've said before, but I wanted to say that we drafted the bill, and Bob Cutter has introduced it as a private member's bill on the 25th of June. So this is a live document right now that we can demand from our politician, no matter where you live, right around Australia. We can demand that they debate this bill, bring it up. It's sitting there in purgatory at the moment, doing nothing. Because, well, actually, Bob Catter introduced it as a private members bill, but Andrew Wilkie, who's an independent from Tasmania, he seconded the bill. I know there's other independents and minor political parties that support this bill as well, but it really needs one of the majors to get behind it to get it debated. It's only 10 pages long, right? Remember the bail-in bill was 411 pages long. So ours, what's less than 10, is about a half a dozen pages of the bill and a half a dozen pages of explanatory notes, why we need this in Australia. Yeah, there's our bill. That's what I was holding up. A bill for an act to re-establish confidence in the banking system, to separate retail commercial banking activities involving the holding of deposits from a wholesale and investment banking involving risky activities and other purposes. So this was a 2003 New Citizen we put out, Fight for a National Bank. Scott Ben Chifley there. We're not the Labor Party, but the Labor Party, there's a tendency when there's a crash that governments do represent the people. There's a tendency, because they're human, they don't want to, have a dark age. But look, banking interests, they're the ones that lobby our politicians the most. We've got to go to them with this bill, and we've got copies. Anyone who wants to take one should get it off us at the back. And then we need a national bank, the way the old Commonwealth Bank used to function before it was privatised. The stuff on the top line, right? Energy plants, highways, roads, rail, dams and reservoirs, hospitals and schools, other infrastructure. It's got to be science driven, like a space program. You've always got to be improving things. Otherwise you use the resources up the same way. But progress is natural, creative, using the creative potential of mankind is our greatest resource, and the money is to serve the real economy, which is the people. Okay, those things on the top should never be sold off. That's the platform of your civilization. The other things, that can be private, and you can have private banks as well. We're not against privatisation. Private industry and private banks. But the government has to be responsible for the essential services. So on the bottom you've got machine tools, construction, forestry, farms, automotive. So there's millions of full-time, meaningful, well-paid, skilled jobs available if we have a vision. And if we arm ourselves with the material to demand it from your MP. But first of all, we've got to solve the economic crisis. We're all going to be refugees, if you like, if we don't solve it. So there's a vision, J.J. Bradfield, he imagined he built the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the tunnels under it. He designed the Bradfield scheme for Queensland to bring water inland. It's not taking all the water out of the rivers, just the flood water, 10% of the flood water. You channel it down the back, permanently fill like air. He envisioned we'd have 50 million people by the year 2000. It's not something to be afraid of. People are the economy. And this is some of the material we've put out over the years, Australia's economic development. And this is the latest one we have. The next financial crash is certain. End the Bank of England, Bank for International Settlements, APRA, Australian Prudential Regulative Authority, end the bankers' dictatorship. Time for Glass-Steagall banking separation and a national bank. So it's all in one place, what you need to know. We're currently drafting, that is the draft legislation for a national bank, modelled on the original Commonwealth Bank. It's currently being worked on to have the real Monty, like we drafted the bill to separate the banks, banking system reform, separation of banks bill. It wasn't until the only politician actually who would do it. No, there was a few, but Bob Catter was like the best out of the worst. Because we can't rely on these politicians to do anything. We've got to fight and do it ourselves. So we wrote it, and then he put it in the same, it's virtually word for word, and we're doing the same with that. We've drafted it, now we're getting some politician, who I won't mention, to actually write it up but with our people in the process, so that it won't get, corrupted. So what you can do, be as creative as you can. Everybody can do something. I know everybody can do something. Get your MP to support the bank separation bill. Study the explanatory memorandum yourself and the bill for yourself. Like I said, it's not hard, it's only 12 pages. And it's written like the way I'm talking, not in some, well, hopefully it's not in language you can't understand. People can write letters, they can email, they can go visit their MP. There's some people that prefer not, they hate their MP, they'll just put it under the door. But do what you can, make sure they debate this bill and support it. And because the only reason we've got this far in this fight is because people around the country have mobilised for it, otherwise you wouldn't even know it. So I'm going to end there and take some questions.
David.
Quick question. Did Lehman Brothers in the United States fail precisely because the United States had a Steagall Act?
Good question, because you know what? I forgot to say that Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999. Yeah, that compromised baby boomer. Good, very good question.
The answer's no.
My name's Shane. Did former Premier Joh Bjelke-Petersen try to fight for something like this back in the 80s?
Well, up until we deregulated the banks, we had that protection, it was called protectionism. I know it might be a bad word these days, but under that system, even if you were a good politician trying to do something for your electorate, you could do it. But since the end of the Bretton Woods system and then the end of the Glass-Steagall, it's all gone. The speculation is the priority. The banks make more money out of lending to that than they do for food security or water security or energy security, right? Now, that's not their responsibility to provide for the people. It's the government's responsibility. So banks will, like drug addicts, they're addicted. They just want, they got their agenda. So, government, whether they're corrupt or they're not corrupt, under a different system, it's easier for everything to go in the right directionality. Even if it can handle some corruption, like, it's never going to be perfect.
Thank you. My name is Raylan. Did you say that CEC is a political party? So does that mean you run candidates? Right. And that's question number one. Question number two, we now have a new treasurer in Josh Frydenberg and a new Prime Minister in Scott Morrison, hence treasurer. Given that we've got rid of Mr. Harborside Mansion, how do you...
Sorry, what did you say?
I said, given that we've got rid of Mr. Harborside Mansion, how do you think your success rate will be with working with the new treasurer and the new Prime Minister?
Right. Well, we did used to call the Turnbull Mr. Goldman Sachs, and this new Prime Minister Mr. Caveat Emptor. Because what's working in our favour is you got the Royal Commission into the banks, and we've been having, I've just come back from Melbourne where we were outside the Royal Commission with a literature table. We're not protesting blowing up balloons or anything. We have material that we want to educate people with. So the Royal Commission is giving us the opportunity to have our voice heard, that's for sure. But Scott Morrison has stuck up for, he said about the crimes of the banks, he said, well, it's the victim's own fault for not doing their homework. You know, dead people, disabled people, vulnerable people in society. It's not their fault. The banks are filled with lawyers and they have hundreds of people employed as so-called experts at manipulating the population. They've been doing cold calling, getting vulnerable people to invest in something like an interest-only loan and things like that. And this was overseen by Scott Morrison when he was treasurer. He voted not to have a Royal Commission of the banks 23 times or 26 times. So did the other one, Bill Shorten, right? They're both as bad as each other. Both, the banks fund both parties.
So what's your strategy then, politically?
Oh, we'll meet with any politicians. We still try to meet with them, yes. Because at the end of the day, they are human. We've got to get to their soul.
Do we have any more questions?
I have a question. If you don't have a question for me, I have one for you before we go. Yep.
Just quickly. My understanding is that the American system and the Australian system are quite different. The situation where the GFC originated in America, as you say, with the death of the banks. But part of the reason, as I've understood it, is that the system of lending is quite different in America to what it is in Australia. Where in America, there's no recourse lending, so that if a mortgagee gets into difficulties, they just go along and give the keys back to the bank and say, here's the house, best of luck, mate. And when the bank is faced with millions and millions of homeowners doing exactly this, well, of course the bank's going to fail. Whereas we don't have that system in Australia. People, when they sign a mortgage, they sign an all-monies mortgage, which means that the bank, even if the investment loan fails, that the bank can still go against other assets. So that's one fundamental difference, which I think we should acknowledge. And the other thing is, you seem to be saying investment mortgages and interest-only mortgages are bad. Well, it's a commercial reality, and in any event, APRA are really coming down on that, and the banks are too terrified now to do much investment-only lending. Is it your proposition that when it all crashes, the evil investors who've saved and invested should be allowed to go to the wall?
No, we've got to save banks as well as investors and the people. We don't need. Steagall separates the real economy from the gambling, but it doesn't like that. What we're heading for, we've got like world GDP's 75 trillion, something like that. The gambling in the system of derivatives is over 1,000 trillion. So you got 75 trillion world GDP. So we could never bail out that bubble. It's a bubble. And in terms of the house, when you mentioned America, they can, if someone couldn't pay their mortgage, they can just leave the key in the door and walk away. The bank doesn't chase them for any debt that they owed, but they're homeless. In Australia, you're homeless and you pay. Whereas Steagall bank separation, remember that the house, the $600,000 house that you're paying for now, or a young person would be paying for $500,000, 30 years ago it was only $20,000 or $30,000. And historically, over the last 100 years in Australia, the average amount that you pay for a house is 3 to 4 times one wage earner. We had the Sunshine Harvester Agreement that was set up that
eight hours a day, can pay off a house and raise a family. You know, we had high standards. Yeah, you can say that we paid people too much, but we made things in Australia back then. The money was staying in our country, and you know, it was, our population was growing, which was a good thing, because you can't, if we sit still, we go backwards. So I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but I wanted to ask a question, because I think I've got to finish. What about the government guarantee? Nobody, I expected that as a question. Well, when the bail-in bill was passed, you know, Pauline Hanson was actually writing an amendment to the bail-in bill to secure the protection of deposits. It got snuck through while that amendment was being written to enshrine the protection of deposits, so that the bail-in wouldn't affect depositors. So it got passed anyway, and in the legislation there's no government guarantee, as in the people's deposits get used to bail out a failing bank. The government guarantee has to be activated. It's currently not activated. It only gets activated when a bank fails. So it never actually gets to the guarantee, because the bank takes your money before to stop it from failing. So that's the bad news, but remember the good news, we've got this bill. We need to get it debated.
Can I thank Meryl and Jen for their talk this afternoon. Our next meeting is Sunday the 28th of October. Our guest